Welcome to the Be Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Be Bold podcast, and hello this week from Seattle. Yep, I'm back in the beautiful Pacific Northwest after travel to Santa Fe, New York City, and New Jersey over the past couple of weeks. The truth is that I really love being in Seattle during the summer, and I try to schedule as few things as possible during this time so I can really, truly enjoy being here. The one exception that I have is my yearly trip to Papua New Guinea. And I go there every August. I've been doing that for the past 8 or 9 years or so. And really, it is the one place that's worth me leaving Seattle for. So I am around, for the next 6 weeks or so, I think, before that trip. And I go each August because that's when the Mount Hagen Festival is held. And this is an unbelievable event where, 75 to 100 tribes from around the country descend on this one area. And it's up in the mountains in Mount Hagen region. Now, this is a country, PNG is a country of about 850 tribes, and no one speaks the same language from tribe to tribe. And at this event, what they do is they come together. They are donned in just fantastical traditional outfits. They've got pig's tusks protruding from their noses. They're wearing bird feathers and pounds of shells and beaks from hornbills that are hanging around their necks. And they've got their bodies painted in this traditional fashion. And then at this event, there's this cacophony of singing and drumming. And it is just amazing. These are called sing-sings. And I kid you not that it is unlike anything you'll experience anywhere else in the world. I promise you that. If you're interested in joining me, you can find out more information about that trip. The one this August, and I've got one in 2019 as well. You can find those on wondertours.com. And we might still be able to get you on this year's trip, and we have some space available on the 2019 tour as well. So I've got a backlog now of wonderful conversations lined up with some amazing women, and you're going to be hearing those in the coming months. So if you're not already a subscriber, be sure to do so, and that way you can listen as soon as those come out. And with the nicer weather, hopefully you're enjoying the podcast while you're on a walk, on a run. I know some of you are working out to this podcast. I don't know, maybe you're working in your garden outside as well. Hey, you know what? You know what would be fun? Drop me a line and let me know where and when you listen to the podcast, and include a photo of what you're doing if you want. That would be kind of fun. And since I'm not traveling for a bit, I can kind of live vicariously through you for a change. And you can send that to beth@beboldpodcast.com. Okay, on to today's conversation. This is with Patricia Schultz. You may not be immediately familiar with her name, but I bet you know her by her books, 1,000 Places to See Before You Die, and 1,000 Places to See in the U.S. and Canada Before You Die. I've known Patricia for a long time, as we often speak at the same events, namely the travel and adventure shows. Now, these happen throughout the country from January through March throughout the United States. And although it's been a couple of years for me, I've also spoken at the New York Times Travel Show, and she often speaks there as well. This was the first time that we got to sit down and really have a chat. And I have to tell you that this was one of the most wonderful conversations I've had on this podcast. It's probably because we are such kindred spirits. Patricia is a true lover and an advocate of travel like no one I know. Not only has she been to many countries, and she said it was north of 100, under a gazillion or something like that, but she believes in her soul that everyone should travel and that there's no excuse for not going somewhere. So in this episode, we talk extensively about travel, but from many different angles and many different facets of it. And I learned about the incredible serendipity that occurred for her books to have come to fruition, and also how many years it took for her first book to be completed. And then we also go back in time and we talk about how she got started in travel. And that includes family trips down the shore, as we say in New Jersey, and also her first trip abroad at 15. And she actually talks about how scared she was on that first trip, as well as a little mishap that happened that is just crazy to think about these days. Patricia's got a wonderful formula that she suggests to people for how they might travel. And another thing that I learned is what she thinks about carry-on versus checked luggage. And you might be surprised about that. Before you hear our conversation, just a quick reminder that if you're new to the podcast, I encourage you to go back to previous episodes where I highlight other interesting and truly courageous women doing extraordinary things. You're really going to find some amazing conversations with these ladies. For example, if you're a runner, you might be super inspired by ultramarathoner Sabrina Sayer. That's episode 43. You can hear a really touching life story by musician Laura Love, episode 32. Or if you're looking for ways to get healthier, listen to wellness coach Sapna Chandra. That's episode 18. Or Dr. Robin Benson, and she's on episodes 11 and 50. Also, don't miss my conversation with travel expert and TV host Samantha Brown. That's episode 36. So if you're a Patricia Schultz fan, you'll love Samantha Brown as well. You can find all the episodes at BeBoldPodcast.com, and that includes the show notes and links to books, people, or other things mentioned during the podcast. You can subscribe wherever you find your favorite podcasts. With that, please enjoy this conversation with Patricia Schultz. Are you actually in New York proper?
Yeah, Midtown. It's like light years away, but it's in the West 50s.
And we're in Soho right now.
Yes.
So I walked down because I love to walk.
Yeah, and it's a great city. It's a walkable city.
It is very much so. I walked down from 42nd or so.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a mile and a half or so.
Yeah, it's a trek, but I'm known to walk, 30 and 40 blocks at a time if I program so I have the time.
Yeah.
Because it's very walkable. It's very flat. And you kind of, point yourself in the direction you're going, and then you just watch life go by.
And there's always something to look at.
I know.
When I walked in here, Emily, who showed me the way, I have a pair of Teva sandals on, just very practical summer sandals, very practical. But I'm walking down the street, and of course I'm seeing everybody in their heels, and I just don't get it.
Their office wear.
Yeah, exactly. Their office wear. And Emily said, "Oh my gosh, I'm the only other person in this city who owns a pair of those."
You see them on weekends.
I guess so. But today is a work day. But I feel like I'm here kind of on vacation. I'm a little bit of time off. I'm going to go see family in New Jersey, and I'm popping in here to see you in the city and staying with some friends here, which is great. So I'm doing the thing.
You brought the rain. Thank you.
I know, from Seattle. Brought the rain.
That's true. Yeah.
I know. Well, this is drip. It's just
I know it's nothing. It's gray.
It's not. Yeah. Well, thanks for carving out the time. I know we've been trying to get this together for probably, I don't know, a year and a half or something at the Travel and Adventure
But not
shows.
on a daily basis. It sounds like we're both crazy busy. But yeah, right.
But you are
travel show.
You are crazy busy at those travel shows, though. So I'm glad that we finally have a chance to sit down and chat, which is great, because I'd love to get to know you better and get to know your story. And I know listeners would love to hear it as well. So let's start with where you are right now, your book and books that you have out. So give us those titles and kind of tell us what you do with your day. What's typical for you?
That's such a loaded question, because people always ask me what I do with my days, because my day goes by as if it's 24 minutes and not. But if pressed to explain just what it is that fills my day, I guess it's stuff. There's so much going on in terms of my original book, which we call the World Book, 1,000 Places. And then the immediate spin-off or knockoff or, second title, call it what you will, which was 1,000 Places in the USA and Canada.
So 1,000 places to see before you die, and then 1,000 places in the US and Canada.
Yeah.
To see before you die?
Yes,
also,
it's a mouthful.
Okay.
But I've never once, thankfully, thankfully had to explain to anybody who would ask, what is the book about? It's very explanatory in that for each, whether it was the World Book or the North America book, these were the places that just, for me had the wow factor that knocked me, that stopped me in my track. And the beauty of it was that the editor said, write for yourself. I said to him, who's the target? Who's the demographic? Who's reading this, hopefully? And he said, just write for yourself. And I did. And it also, I think, confirmed to my publisher and to myself that I was the perfect author, I like to think, in that travel to me is so much. It's so comprehensive in terms of what you look for and what thrills you and what you go in search of and what you hope to, is it natural beauty? Is it man-made beauty? Is it culture? Is it music? Even within the sphere of music, is it a Renaissance festival or medieval music, or is it Zydeco or swamp pop, or is it rock? Is it Coachella? So it's all over the board. And so that was what, ultimately came to be this comprehensive mix of places that filled both the World Book and the USA Book. But this is a long-winded way of answering what I do with my days, because it's either just writing up in some shape or form for a newsletter or blogs or social media or magazine articles that I may do from a recent past story or trip or adventure, or the next one that I'm about to go on. And generally speaking, the time that I'm home, and home for me is New York City, where we sit as we speak, and I love home. I am always thrilled to acknowledge and say that I live in one of my favorite cities in the universe. So I come home and I have very limited time. I have a husband. I need to familiarize myself with what's going on with him, just to have quality time, which is often nothing more than just being, within the same four walls and catching up. Making sure that everything is in place for the next trip. I leave in a few days for Africa. Some of these trips are big trips. They entail a lot, and others are domestic. But, sometimes they entail even more prep or, busyness before. So I also have a place in upstate New York where my family's from, in the beautiful and the very historic Hudson River Valley. We have 4 gorgeous seasons. I love to go there for at least 5 minutes every once in a while to see my family, to see my home, and suddenly the year goes by and we're pinching ourselves because it's 15 years this year that 1,000 Places has come out. And in fact, it feels like...
And how many millions of copies have been sold?
Many.
Yeah. It's fantastic.
Many. And what thrills everyone is that we do our utmost to keep it updated and fresh and relevant, and adding places and making sure that something hasn't burned down or a chef hasn't left or an annex onto one of our world-class museums hasn't appeared, or, we're keeping it updated. But we're thrilled that it continues to be a best-selling book, because this notion that life is short, the world is huge, and the possibilities are endless is very timeless, and it's very universal, because we did many, many, many translations. This notion that, get out the front door and explore is, appeals to everyone. It resonates in everyone. And the demographic too, if you're just out of school, if you're just retiring, and then everybody in between, everybody loves to travel, I like to think.
Yeah, yeah. That's not always the case, but it's certainly a nice sentiment for sure. So I do have so many questions for you, and I'm jotting down these notes because I don't want to forget. But one thing that comes to mind is, where did the idea for the book come from? Was that your idea, or did a publisher come to you and say, hey, how would you like to work on this book?
For all of those who think that, I was a greeter at Walmart and decided one day, let me write a book.
No one thinks that, believe me.
No, but people, I think, are curious to know how I arrived at that wondrous moment when I suddenly was given a contract to write a book.
Out of nowhere, quote unquote, right?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
This overnight sensation that had been diligently traveling and writing for many decades, but quietly so. I had been writing travel guides, and I met when living 3 very, very important and informative years in Florence, Italy. I ran into, talk about how the stars align and people fall into your path. I met in the back seat of a shared cab to the airport for a flight back to the U.S., a gal from New York City who was in Florence writing a book called Made in Italy. Oh, I said, I would love to write a book like that. Fast forward, we collaborated on the book. It was the same publisher who then, years later, would call me on the phone and said, do you have any good ideas? Why don't you come in and let's talk about your next title? So all of those hundreds of hours of no remuneration, because when you, as a writer, kind of sit down and think what you're being remunerated for on an hourly basis for what ultimately comes to be a printed book on the shelf, royalties, it's pretty much nothing.
It's not a good idea to ever calculate that.
No. Or to ever think that I'm going to make a killing.
Yeah.
Or this is going to buy my mother the home in Boca Raton. No. If you break even, it's a remarkable thing. If you do it for the satisfaction and the reward and the love of writing and sharing and
sharing, right?
Yeah,
giving.
Yeah. Then it's a wondrous thing. So the first book was a great experience. I learned tons about how to put a book together, the whole book industry, publishing, etc.
And that was actually, to go back, that was a collaboration on Made in Italy with this other woman. What's her name?
Annie Brody.
Okay.
And a day does not pass that I do not thank her for this opportunity, because we put together what we thought was a wonderful book. It did fine. But considering the years that it took for us to actually create it, I look back and I'm amazed that it did as well as it did. But it was the same publisher who was then asking me to come in and share any, ideas about a future book. But I still, after writing all of those years, was somewhat naive in terms of what a book of this breadth would entail. They, however, thought it was like the coolest thing in town, a book of wonders, the best of the best, places around the world that you'd get on a plane to, just to go have the best baguette in Provence. And the publisher said, well, can you do it in a year? And he said, take 2. And in fact, I took 8. And I could have taken another 8, except that at that point they were tapping their toe and pointing at their watch and saying, we think it's time.
And you probably rotated through a few people, editors or whatnot
7.
during that process. Yeah, that's scary. That's a scary thing, because then you think the next person could axe this whole project.
Yeah. And I also was both elated that nobody was, calling me 6 times a day to see where the manuscript was, / disappointed that nobody had enough belief in the book that they wanted to see what I was writing. They just gave me, carte blanche to do whatever. There was very little direction, and there was seemingly very little interest. But what they were doing, I think, was just busy doing, the other dozens of titles that they put out on a seasonal basis, and knowing that I was plodding along.
And they somehow trusted you in the meantime. There had to be some trust there. Yeah, yeah, I think so.
But I was submitting piecemeal. Oh, here's Italy. I had 1,000 places just in Italy because I knew it well. And because if you've ever been to Italy,
Oh, there are 1,000 places there. Yeah. 1,001, I think.
Yeah. And just in like one region alone.
Yeah.
So, and here is Kenya, and so it was very sporadic and very erratic. But at the end of the day, it all came together. And from the moment it was out, it just had a meteoric, sudden popularity and success. And we spoke almost really just months after the release of the first book about what to do next. And that's when we decided to do North America, because you may know this number that it has improved over time at a snail's pace, but only 35% of Americans, 37, 34, I don't know, have passports.
Right.
But what's important is to wonder just how many of those 35% are actually using them, and how frequently, and to go where, to the Bahamas or on safari or
now Canada.
Yeah, to buy your prescriptions.
Yeah, no offense to Canada, but yeah, that's not the big adventure trip abroad.
Yeah,
really.
Or taking your kids to Cancun. So you hope that people will mix it up, use incentive and inspiration from the USA book or North America book to see what we have here in our backyard, because it is nothing less than astonishing. I mean, I don't mean to belittle people who think that they want to see or they need to see America first. I hear that all the time. I'm going to see America first. But actually, you should not. You should mix it up, because the energy often and the commitment to do a big trip, and for some people, that can be a trip to London, not a trip around the world. It can be a trip to, like you said, Montreal or Western Canada with its magnificent parks, but international. So I think you kind of need to acknowledge that there are no guarantees. Your knees are fine today and your health, knock on wood, you're vertical today, you're ambulatory, you have your wits about you. So I think ideally I encourage people to mix it up, for every one or two trips or vacations or excursions that you feel you need to see, exploring America first, that you do work into that planning, something that's, really flings open your horizons in your head, to really go beyond what keeps you comfortable.
I really like the idea of that and hadn't thought about it in those terms. My husband was just saying, I reached out to my mom because we've taken her on a couple of trips, and more recently it was Scotland and Ireland. And she's a genealogist, so she loved Scotland, tracing the roots there. And so he said, I was talking to my mom about, let's just plan another trip. Where would you like to go? And she said, boy, I really loved Scotland, but I want to go to Chicago next, because I've never really explored Chicago. And I just thought that was great, because there's so much there.
Yeah.
She lives near Cincinnati. And so it's just relatively easy for her. She's 82. She still drives around in a camper van. She parks outside the McDonald's. She siphons off their Wi-Fi or at the library, and then she sleeps in her car and travels all over the place.
Her.
She's great.
But it does, that first trip, it really lights you up. It really just ignites this excitement that the world, Chicago, New Orleans, Scotland, Buenos Aires, there's so much to explore, and there's so much beyond what you knew existed. People don't even have an inkling if all they do is sit home and watch on their glorious 50-inch flat screen gorgeously made documentaries by the Smithsonian or National Geographic or the Travel Channel. Oh, I just saw that something about the most beautiful national parks in America. Go see them. There's just nothing that beats seeing them in the three-dimensional, to immerse yourself in that natural beauty that you think you're seeing in the three-dimensional, but it's just an inkling. It's nothing more than just a taste.
How do you get someone off the couch to do that? Because there are so many excuses why not to go.
I think the biggest excuse, they say that we do everything in life from fear and love. So if you really love the notion of travel enough, you make it happen. But it's often fear, and fear holds you back. And I still have fear. I like to think of it as excitement. It's that feeling in your stomach. People often find in that trepidation enough to keep them back. They say that oftentimes the most difficult thing is just to get out the front door.
Well, I can attest to that, because anytime I go on a trip, especially if I'm leading a tour, I am so stressed out the day or two before that I think, what the heck was I thinking about this? And then I'm also trying to get everything into a carry-on bag too. And then I'm thinking, what am I thinking here? Coming on this trip, I actually had the notion, because it's podcasting, so I have a little bit of podcasting equipment. I really thought, you know what? Why don't you just go with a backpack, Beth, and then just buy anything that you need? Because I really wanted to make it simple, but my bag was much lighter than it usually is.
Yeah, people get really stressed about packing. And I have never, for all of those people listening, I never, ever travel with carry-on only.
Oh, you don't?
No, I just can't do it. Yeah, everybody thinks, I bet. And it's funny because I've regressed. My first trip around the world, I was in my 20s. It was 1988. And I had we didn't have wheels then. And, backpacking was just too shoestring budget looking for me. But I did have an over-the-shoulder carry-on for around the world. And I thought, I can do this. And I did.
Yeah.
But I spent so much shipping stuff home that I collected along the way because it was a 2-month trip that I thought, really, just bring a suitcase. And ever since then I have. And now you have wheels, so it's all very easy.
Oh, well, you've just inspired a lot of people because I'm always on the end of only bring a carry-on bag, especially on the way to a trip, because it's so likely that you just know something's going to go sideways. Your bag isn't going to show up.
But here I am to tell you that in all my trips, and they have been numerous, never, ever, ever, ever once, I've just jinxed myself because I can see me leaving for Uganda on Saturday and my bag not showing up on the other end. I do take precautions. I bring something carry on with me. That's a change of underwear, anything, any kind of medications I need, which is aspirin, a toothbrush, a change of clothes in that event. But by now they're all tagged and they're all computerized. And at the very worst, you arrive, it's not there, and they'll deliver it to your hotel within 24 hours. If you arrive and you're immediately onto a cruise, a ship, an expedition, then you need to think differently. But I don't bring like 100 pounds, and I don't bring a steamer trunk, and I don't bring 3 suitcases. I bring a very small one that oft times can be checked in as carry-on.
Yeah.
I mean,
but you just don't want to have to lug it through the airport.
And that's just what happens because, sometimes you walk a year and a half just to get to your departure gate.
When I was coming out here, I had a layover in Salt Lake City. I was flying Delta, which I have to go into JFK. And so I flew through Salt Lake City. I'm so confused. No, it was actually just coming from Santa Fe. I've been traveling so much in the last 3 days alone. I'm getting my flights confused. But I ended up getting on a flight that was 2 hours earlier with my layover. And I thought, you know what? If I had checked my bag, it would have been difficult or impossible for me to do that. So anyway, I totally hear you. And I think a lot of people are going to be inspired by that because they're going to say, hey, Patricia is a super experienced traveler. And here she is giving me permission to travel.
And her blessing.
Yes, exactly. Because me, I don't, and people know that. So that's good. That's a good.
There was something, in fact, on Facebook, one of my uber super, oh my God, lives on a plane kind of well-traveled blogging journalist friends that, threw the question out there, who checks in their bag? And there was just radio side me and I felt embarrassed to raise my, virtual hand. And I said, here I am.
Yeah.
And the response to that was just what you were saying. I mean, people were astonished. And I thought, how, solo in the world am I that I'm the only one that does it? But, by now.
Yeah. Well, I think that there is something to be said for being more agile without your bag, like walking through the airport. And as long as you're not concerned about having to have it as soon as you arrive. And you've got it locked. Hopefully you've got it locked when you check it too. So there is that about it. So, okay, good. You had mentioned your husband. What does he do for work?
He's retired by now, and he's older than I. It's created, not a problem, but it's created a situation where he's always available to travel with me, but the kind of travel that he likes at his later years is starting to diverge from my approach, which is hit the ground running. So when I know that I'm going to a destination which I'm already familiar enough with to understand that it's just not compatible with him, we don't take the same trips. We do, so many a year. He's Greek. He's born in America from very Greeky, they call them.
Greeky.
The Greek American. So every 2 years, we try to go back to Greece and visit another island. There are hundreds of them. This is my approach to life in general. Never go back to whenever we're in this incredible place, whether it's, some far-flung island or, a beautiful city, he'll look at me and we're having the time of our life and he'll say, we're never coming back here again, are we? Because he
knows you well.
Yeah. I've seen it. I've loved it. I've explored it to the max. We're going down every side alley and turning over every restaurant suggestion and, from early in the morning until late at night, crawling back into bed. But you were saying how your mother-in-law enjoyed Scotland so much. And I thought what you were going to say was she wanted to return to Scotland because you understand wherever you are that you've just really explored the tip of the iceberg. So suddenly, you want to go back. But I can't do that because there's just so much out there. For all that I've seen, there's umpteen million other possibilities that call me.
So when you go to a destination, are you doing a lot of research in advance? And so you're doing a lot of research, and then and you're shaking your head. We should say for listeners that you're shaking your head, yes.
Nodding my head, nodding my head.
Yeah, nodding your head, yes. So you do a lot of research, and so you are filling your days. You're not sleeping in until 10 o'clock. And
oh, does anybody do that?
Oh, yeah, they do. When they go on my tours, they say, what? We have to meet at 8 o'clock in the morning? And I think, are you kidding? I've been up for 3 hours. I've run 8 miles and had breakfast, and I'm ready to go.
Oh, that'll make them feel good. That'll make them feel like a sloth.
Yeah, well, I don't know. That's how
and it's funny because then I always think, oh, I need a vacation from my vacation. But in fact, when I get home, I'm, the same at home where I'm just overwhelmed with so much that there is to do. But there's a lot to be said for all the adrenaline, and all of the excitement and all of this sense of adventure and exploring and, wanting to see it all. Immediately what comes to mind is Europe and all of these great cities, Paris, Berlin, Amsterdam, Stockholm, Rome, Venice, even if the alarm wasn't set, I kind of bolt up in bed in the morning because I think, gotta go. And it's not always regimented in that I have a, hour by hour itinerary, although depending upon the needs, in that particular kind of trip, if it's for work, and I put that in air quotes, or if it's vacation, and I put that in air quotes because it's commonly one and the same thing, and how lucky am I? But I just want to make sure that I haven't walked past something brilliant that, is a UNESCO site or the oldest or the biggest or the grandest or the, some superlative. But I do leave a lot of room to just wander and explore, because there's this great expression about how serendipity is the best travel guide. And sometimes it's being gloriously lost, like putting the map away as if they even exist anymore, or turning off your GPS then, whether it's the one in your head or the, one on your phone.
And talking to the locals and talking to the concierge, even though they have their own agenda.
Yeah.
But just being able to talk to people and find out where the locals are going. That's so important.
Yeah, especially eating.
Mm-hmm.
Because by the time something makes it onto Yelp or TripAdvisor or in a book like 1,000 Places, or, is online with 1,400,000 million rave reviews, there's a very good chance that you're not going to be the only non-local or the only American there, which isn't a bad thing, because, sometimes they step up their game when they know they're being recognized and they're drawing people from around the world, and they do manage to stay authentic and wonderful and recommendable. But you lose a lot of the sense of discovery, like you've stumbled upon some, a gem that's really special, and often inexpensive. So that's the perfect combination.
Mm-hmm. You said you grew up in upstate New York?
Yeah.
Where do you get your energy and your curiosity from?
It's a very good question, and I don't have the answer for it, because my mother was born from immigrant parents from southern Italy. I'm half Italian. Actually, we grew up thinking we were 500% Italian. And my father...
You're not waving your hands enough for that.
I'm clasping them so that I don't. And we used to think that, we were half Italian and half German because of the Schultz surname. But then I had 23andMe DNA testing done, and it turned out that I'm not so German at all, but I am Northern European. So anyway, it was a very modest upbringing, and we never traveled except every August. I remember it like it was yesterday, to something as far away and exotic and exciting as the Jersey Shore.
You went down the shore.
I went down the shore. And I was packed and ready to go a week in advance, because to me, that was everything.
How long did you go for?
Ever. Oh, you mean once we were there?
Yeah. So was it a week, or you went for the month of August?
No, it would feel like, but my father, bless him, who worked, 4 shifts a day, he was a corrections officer, a security guard at what was then known as an asylum for the criminal insane in upstate Beacon, New York. Things have changed since then. But he came from a very rough environment, and this was his quality moment to spend with his family for 1 week on the Jersey Shore. We stayed in a boarding house. I remember the woman who waited for us on the sidewalk every August when we arrived with this old jalopy of a station wagon that was jam-packed with,
wood panel. We had one of those too.
But I remember that. And so I often hear people say, oh, the kids are too young. And here I am, to tell you that my earliest memory ever, not just in life, but in travel, was when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I was in the back seat of the station wagon with the window down and the wind in my face. And remember how the upholstery used to crack and be underneath your when your shorts were too short, and there was no air conditioning, but off we were to another.
Were your parents smoking? My parents were smoking. Yeah.
No, but I remember we wouldn't even stop. We just passed the tuna fish sandwiches around because we had to get there. So anyway, it was my first experience of understanding that for as wonderful and comfortable as that little bubble was, because I had a great life and we had extended family and the front door was always open and people in and out. It was just a lovely, warm environment within which to raise a family or within which to grow and flourish.
You have siblings?
Yes, one. And we're the, country mouse and the city mouse. We're night and day and we're polar extremes. And we often joke about...
Is this a brother or sister?
Oh, a sister.
So a sister. Is she the country mouse? Or
yes.
She's the country mouse. So, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know because since you were doing all this travel, if you considered yourself the country mouse or...
Oh, never ever.
Where does she live?
Upstate New York on an 18th century farm. I mean, she's very Martha Stewart and she's very everything that I am not, and yet we're inseparable and we both share a love for family and goodness and natural beauty. They're always doing the national park thing, so I piggyback along with them wherever I can. They are not well traveled. They do travel somewhat in a very, but we share so much, and we shared that love of, getting in the car and taking off for parts unknown. A nod to Anthony Bourdain, because you find excitement where you find it. And for us, it was the Jersey Shore. But like I said, it's my earliest memory. And I think that you may not remember particulars or details or specifics as you grow up, but it did nurture in me the importance of curiosity and stoking that curiosity and exploring and understanding that beyond your bubble is an entire world. And my parents were very encouraging for me to go off on, once I was old enough, on, weekend trips with friends, or at a time when nobody else in my hometown did this at 15, to go and visit a friend who lived in the Dominican Republic. That was unheard
Wow, that's
of.
a big deal.
It was.
What year was that?
I was 15. It was like the 18th century. It just seems so long ago.
You took a boat.
I hitchhiked. But my father, again, bless him, he worked, double shifts and triple shifts. And this was a man who had never traveled beyond New Jersey, who didn't have a passport, and who wanted to have me do something that he understood was so important to me, and that was to go off to some crazy country. I'm sure he couldn't find it on a map.
What gave you the idea that you wanted to go do that?
I had a friend, who lived there.
Well, you mentioned that, but but still, people have friends who do a lot of things or who live in other places and they just think that that's not for me, or they don't have the gumption to say, I'm going to go visit.
Or they continued this misperception of what that destination must be like because they saw it in a movie or they saw it in the headlines or because they make up things. But I, through her, had come to love this whole Latino destination. She told me about the antiquities in Santo Domingo. It was where, Columbus and his brother was the first governor, I think, and it's the first cathedral in the New World. And, all of the importance of Europe, who was coming to the New World, stopped and over time established a foothold in the Dominican Republic. So for me, it wasn't just the beach resorts and the golf possibility. It was, to me, this romance of an island in the middle of the Caribbean, and for all of, the palm trees and the wind and the ocean and all of the natural beauty, it was also the history, and it was also the Latin sense of family that she had. And I really wanted to immerse myself, and boy did I, because I thought I had an extended family because of my mother's Italian connections, but the Latino world, it's, everybody's your aunt and your uncle, and you've got first cousins for days, and they're in and out of the house all of the time, and somebody's always picking up a guitar, and somebody's always bringing in avocados from the backyard to make for breakfast. And there was music and a language and a culture and foods, and there was just customs and ways that were totally removed from anything I knew in upstate Beacon, New York.
And you were open to it. You didn't reject it.
I embraced it. I wanted to be adopted. I offered to come back on an annual basis if they would have me. So it was really, that was my first passport, my first stamp. I was scared out of my mind flying at 15 alone to a foreign country. In fact, I got on a plane that was going to Paris because at that time at JFK, the control and the monitoring of boarding passes was very loose. They would just send you off on your way, and you walked out the door and onto the tarmac, and there would be 5 different planes sitting there. So I just followed the others and wound up in, 17B, thinking, here I am, off for my first adventure. And I heard the announcement that the flight was going to Paris, and I froze.
Can you imagine?
I almost wound up in Paris. That would have been pretty cool.
That would have been cool. That would have been a great story.
Yes.
It would have been great. So were you just embarrassed as anything
as all
and saying,
get out. Yeah.
I've got to get off this plane?
Yeah, because I stood up and I made like I was going to the bathroom, and I made my way to the, as they were called then, stewardess. And I said, is this the flight to Santo Domingo? And she goes, oh, no, honey, it's the flight over there. It's the plane over there. So I ran and made it. They closed the door and I was off.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, that's a great story, though. But how crazy if you had landed in Paris. But better that you didn't.
I would have had my heart in my throat the whole way.
I know. You probably would have never traveled again. We wouldn't have 1,000 places to see before you die. Otherwise.
You'd have one.
I know. So you started taking the trip, starting with the Dominican.
And then I did a junior year abroad. So I couldn't leave Beacon soon enough. Population 12,000. It was just too sleepy for me. And one of our native sons, about whom we were so proud, was Pete Seeger, the musician. He was from Beacon, and he put it on the map. And he wrote many songs, made many songs famous, including the music from Guthrie that was "This Land Is Your Land." So I had an enormous pride in the history of the Hudson Valley. But in the same breath, I just couldn't leave soon enough, thinking that, I'll come home. It'll always be here. And in fact, it still is as beautiful as ever. But in the meantime, I was one of the very, very, very few in my immediate circle or in the town that went off to university, not to the local community college or to Vassar, if I aspired to such lofty educational heights, because that was an hour away. I could have been home for dinner. But I went off, far, far away to Washington, D.C. That was light years away from me, but it was
but still very international.
Extremely so. And I didn't really understand just how much my campus, self-contained as it was, would become a kind of United Nations. I mean, it was a very fascinating and a very interesting mix of students from all over the world. I heard every language. I was invited to, this person's home for Pakistani food, and come on Saturday, they're doing something at my embassy, which was the Panamanian embassy. You'll be my guest. You'll meet, the whole Panamanian community. And I thought, there's a Panamanian community. So, I met students from countries I didn't even know until then were, existed. And it did open my head. And then everybody, it seemed, was doing junior year abroad. So I thought, I'll do that. And it was Spain, which was tame enough. Today everybody's doing Sydney and Hong Kong, and they're doing more Asia, I think, when we headed more towards Europe. But it was my base. Madrid was and continues to be one of my favorite cities, just magnificent, so much life and so much after hours excitement and just lovely people. And the whole influence of Northern Africa and the Arabs and the Muslim caliphate that was there for 700 years that makes Spain and Portugal Mediterranean and very different in a Southern European way from the Netherlands and Scandinavia and the UK and all of these countries far in the north of Europe. But with Madrid as my base, we managed to go, jump on a plane or get on an overnight train, and within overnight, you're just about anywhere. And the administration and the professors were actually quite accommodating because they understood the real reason of our taking a junior year abroad, and that was to immerse yourself in a culture and in a life that was far removed from your own. So that, for me, was the pivotal. That really, really, really. And so I always encourage people, if they have children or if their next door neighbor is asking them what they think, to encourage people to have their kids or the kids themselves. I always heard, I would go, but my boyfriend. Oh, please.
Well, I find that I specialize in women-only tours, but I do co-ed trips as well, especially when the husband wants to come. That's the excuse for the co-ed trips. But on these women-only tours, I'm finding more and more that the women will leave the husbands or the significant others behind because he or she doesn't want to travel. And they're just saying, I'm going to do this because you only live once. Yeah. And it's nothing against that person. It's just you've got different interests or different ways of travel, like you have found with you and your husband. And I think it's great. And I think we're opening up more and more to that.
I do, but I think that the old school boyfriend, girlfriend, the first flush of a honeymoon relationship when you're 19, 20 and it's time to sign on for junior year abroad, I'd be curious to see just how prevalent that is because I know in my day, and I wonder how much it has changed, that so many forwent that opportunity and still regret having done so. But, oh well, so off we went, and it was the time of a lifetime. And this notion of women traveling alone or anybody traveling alone, it's very, very, very much an important discussion to have because it's a shame when those who supposedly support you in life instead wind up discouraging you because they see it as a risk or
a threat.
Yeah, dangerous or
a threat to the relationship.
Oh, yes.
Right.
But also when it's your parents or your siblings or your best friends.
Yeah.
Or in my case, my country sister who feels most comfortable at home, but over time has understood that she too has opened her wings and spread her wings. But there are siblings who are far the opposite, who think that because they've chosen to live a more careful and more sedentary and a more, kind of sequestered life, that too is what they wish upon you. From the heart, supposedly, they tell you it comes, but you wonder, is there a little bit of jealousy? Is there a little...
Where do you think it comes from?
I think maybe jealousy. I think that it's more important for the individual who's at the receiving end not to try to analyze and figure out where it comes from so much as find it in yourself to not listen and to take off regardless. And, come home and having proved them wrong, that it wasn't at all risky or dangerous. Look where I live in New York City, there's a far greater chance I'll have somebody take my wallet here than on the streets of Rome, God forbid. Oh, Rome is dangerous. And I'm thinking, have you been to New York?
Well, the first thing that I always ask people is, have you been to Rome? Because you use that example. And do you know firsthand? Or where are they getting their statistics from too? And I ask that very genuinely. I try not to be too snarky about it. But yeah, I think that I think it's an interesting question to explore is where does that come from? Is it the jealousy? Is it genuinely a fear that something's going to happen to you as a loved one? You don't want someone to get hurt.
And there's that perfect quote from Aldous Huxley that says, to travel is to discover that everyone is wrong about other places. So just go, go if you've seen or heard something or listened to somebody who's just returned or read a book or there's something that has enlightened, it has sparked in you this interest, then go and explore it. And chances are it'll just blow you away. And you'll come back and you'll be, let's say you've even done that experience on your own, because it's very hard to find a girlfriend or a male friend or, your dog or somebody has the same time available or the same budget available or the same interests. So I say put all of them aside. You wait around for people to be ready and you'll wake up and you're 90. So go and do it. And
well, even when you wake up and you're waiting for you to be ready, you could be 90. I've had women, this is a kind of a sad story, but I've had a woman, she was contacting me for a long time, telling me how much she wanted to go to Vietnam and she wanted to travel there, but she wasn't quite there yet. And she would call me. Mostly I get emails, but this woman would call me. And then years into this, she called me and she said, I'm finally ready to go to Vietnam. I have a walker now. Do you think that'll be a problem? And you know how Asian countries are, Patricia. They're cobblestone streets and they're stairs and there's not necessarily an elevator that's working in a building, even in your hotel. It could easily be out. And I just said, I'm really sorry, but it won't work. I think I referred her to Rhodes Scholar or something.
Yeah,
somebody
which
who's
is
more,
excellent.
somebody, an organization that's more equipped to handle somebody that may be older or has a disability or is a little bit slower, because I just can't do that. But it just made me so sad. And it reinforced the idea that I don't want people to go into debt to travel. I think that's not the kind of advice that I want. But I think that there are ways that you can save your money to travel. You don't need to pay $100 for your cable every month. You know, save that $100. By the end of the year, you've got $1,200. You can pay $600 for a flight.
You know, I've never done the math, but they say forego that one Starbucks daily.
The $6, $8 Starbucks,
daily,
I know.
Times 365. I mean, there are myriad ways, and it really is all about priorities, but it is very sad because, you know, there are these, you know, wonderful quotes about wait until you're ready and it'll never happen. And not just regarding travel, but pretty much life in general, because so much of this reflects just how you travel through life as well. So I think half of the excitement is going when you're not totally ready, when you don't really know what to expect, when you haven't done as much research as you would like, and you're just jumping off, and, you know, you're soaring after that. And you go with the flow, and you go with the trade winds, and you go, you know, with this commitment that you're going to have the time of your life. But you were saying about how these trips that you do, people are very, very, especially women, although things are changing, as you said, enormously. But, you know, people are very hesitant to travel alone. And there's alone and there's alone, because I'm sure you get people traveling in your groups who alone, you know, I'm coming alone. Yeah, but within 24 hours, your family.
You're going to have best friends.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And whether you're on a ship and you're one of 600 or 3,000, I recommend 600. I recommend smaller ships. Yeah. Or you're in a group that's, you know, 8, or you're a group of 30. You know, you immediately gravitate, and you're all like-minded. You've all chosen the destination because you share an interest in Vietnam or in Patagonia or in, you know, the Pacific Islands. And you've all maybe, you know, for the last many, many years have nurtured this fascination even. So you're in the right group, and you'll never be alone. I actually welcome my time alone in my room in the evening, but it's nice to know at breakfast you sit down with familiar faces, or in dinner, you know, over a glass of wine, you're all exchanging your last trips or where you hope to go next. And people, in fact, do then, with these newfound friends, make plans for their next trip. So traveling alone is also very fascinating. And I'm sure you, as well as I, have traveled that way very much for business purposes, and also because for the first many decades in my life, I just, you know, everybody was busy with their careers and their kids and, you know, climbing the corporate ladder. And, you know, the list was long for reasons that people did not travel. So I did, you know, just take off on my own.
And there's a difference between traveling alone and being lonely.
Yeah.
And I think, because I'm just thinking alone, solo, by yourself, they're all the same. But then within that, there's being lonely within that. And that can happen. I've traveled solo and have felt lonely at times, but then I find somebody who's from Seattle who happens to be sitting next to me in the middle of nowhere, India. And, you know, you strike up a conversation, of course.
Yeah, because lonely, I think, is an isolated moment. You know, maybe you're back at the hotel room. You know, so if they have good Wi-Fi, connect with somebody back home.
Yeah.
But I think lonely, I'm not lonely by nature, but I do understand that it's a consideration. People just don't want to take off for a 10-day trip or a 2-week trip, or, so make it more contained, or consider this notion of a group, or give it a shot. This idea that you'll be too lonely is from somebody who has never tried it, maybe. Mm-hmm. So I think everything is worth doing at least once to see if what lives in your head, in fact, is real, or it's just, stoked by your best friend who's never done it either. Like you were telling me before, you always ask where this comes from. Have you traveled a lot by yourself and found out that the loneliness factor is real? Or is it just something that makes you hesitate? You know, is it coming from somebody who's actually never traveled at all?
I read somewhere that you were in the Middle East in your 20s.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
I did my junior year abroad in Madrid, and I came back and finished university as a senior, and the day after graduation, everybody was off to their apprenticeship or going home and picking up the family business or doing summer school and prep for graduate programs, and all very admirable aspirations that were just not appealing to me. So I grabbed my passport and I headed back to Europe, and I went to visit a friend who was living in Florence because of the whole ancestral roots tourism, which is very much a reason that people then and now travel, because I wanted to explore. That was the excuse I gave my mother, more of my mother's background. You know, I grew up in an Italian-American environment, and I wanted to see just how real or removed it was from the real deal. And my mother, in all of her time, had never, because of finances, and because she was suddenly busy having me and raising me and my sister. But, you know, again, people have all kinds of reasons working, many of them very solid and real, and others just created. But she had never been to Italy, so I took it upon myself to go and
not to bring her, but just to go yourself. Uh-huh.
She did actually come and visit me many times after that. And like with your mother-in-law, after the first trip, it was like, oh, where are we going next? So I went to Florence for what I thought was a couple weeks and stayed for 3 years. Because,
wow, 3 years.
Yeah, if you've been to Florence, you know that it is one of the most magnificent cities. And I learned Italian. I kind of self-taught myself Italian. Oh, and there was Giovanni.
He kept you there for 3 years.
Yes, he was my language teacher.
Oh, yeah.
So I had moved east from Spain to Italy, which was far, you know, the more you move east in the Mediterranean towards Greece and then Turkey and then into the Middle East, you understand that it shifts very deeply, and it becomes a lot more exotic and a lot more North African and Arab and a lot more fascinating to me. So when I was based in Florence, I could grab a train to Rome, and from Rome, there were very inexpensive flights to anywhere in that corner of the world, whether it was to Istanbul or Tel Aviv or Casablanca or Tunis. So in Cairo, I went to Cairo many, many times, and I developed a kind of circle of friends who found a real fascination in that culture and in those traditions. And they were living and traveling around, and they were involved in the, you know, State Department, or they were involved in international trade or whatever. I was the vagabond. I was, you know, the one that was experiencing a kind of gap year that turned into a gap life. But these were friends who actually had jobs.
How were you paying for this?
I was being very creative. I was bambinaya, a governess. I was doing translations. I was, as a non-licensed guide, taking small groups around Italy and around Florence.
And you spoke the language fluently.
Yeah.
Do you still?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, I studied linguistics in university, and I've always had a real interest in languages, especially Romance languages. But I've studied non-Romance languages like Arabic and Chinese and German because of my German. I can read menus in many languages, but the only languages I really have a grasp on, although you may think otherwise at this point, is English and Spanish because of my year in Madrid. And I've always kept up with keeping that at least functioning to some degree, and Italian, which because of my 3 years of total immersion and Giovanni, I came to speak it very, very well. They say that if you dream in that language and if you count in that language, then you can consider yourself fluent. I don't know that I was ever 100% fluent. I could not carry on conversations about, they say, philosophy and religion and politics. If you're not familiar expressing yourself in those topics where you need a really profound grasp on the language. So I was, you know, superficially fluent. Anyway, I came to know the Middle East. You know, I went to Abu Dhabi and Dubai and Yemen and areas that it was very thrilling. It was scary.
To say the least.
It was scary, but it was thrilling because the Arab people, Syria, Lebanon, the Arab people, the hospitality of the Arab people goes back millennia. because of all the trade routes and the silk routes and all of, it's time since forever that they have welcomed foreigners and merchants passing through. Everybody offers a glass of mint tea. Everybody opens their home. So I understood early on that my father, German as he was, always said, always follow your heart, but bring your brain with you. So I was always practical. And it has served me well living here in New York City. But I couldn't say that I had a lot of city influence then because I hadn't yet explored, living in New York City. But I just had a certain practicality about, it was the Germanness in me. So I was cautious.
Well, if I can just interrupt you for a second, because you talk about being in the city and practical, but also, and I explain this to people when they say, or, when I'm talking about safety in travel, I say, look, I grew up in New Jersey. And I spent time in New York City. And so I think that there is, I wouldn't say necessarily practicality, but there's a level of confidence that not to stumble it down the block, looking at your map, looking up at the skyscrapers. You have to be spot on and be confident. And you probably brought that with you.
I like to think so. And body language.
Exactly.
Because you being blonde and me being not blonde, but clearly not local. And although being dark-ish, that always, my mother's, I inherited a lot from my mother and not my father's blue eyes. So if I liked to think, as I kind of swaggered down the street, that, in Turkey, they thought I was Turkish, or the Egyptians felt that maybe I was somebody's first cousin coming home to visit. So I don't think they ever took me maybe as a local, but they didn't think I was some wide-eyed innocent from Iowa either. So body language, part of the caution, you just reach out and you engage to the degree that you feel it will not jeopardize your well-being. And also first impressions and understanding from the heart where this person's intentions come from. I also felt more inclined to, have conversations with women who probably had a certain degree of pity going on, like this poor girl traveling alone. What was she thinking? So oftentimes it would be making friendships for the moment or the day, or sometimes years later, you're still in contact with some of these people who turn out to be the most gracious and the loveliest and the most accommodating and hospitable. And I felt that all throughout the Middle East. The music fascinated me, the language, the antiquities. Really, the what you find there that are 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years old, when in New York City, if something's more than 30 years, they tear it down. So it was fascinating to me. It was a real eye-opening experience. It was an area of the world that I hadn't really intended to become so enamored of, but you only need to visit Egypt once and understand just how gracious and welcoming the people are. The Egyptians are some of the nicest anywhere.
How long did you spend in the Middle East, would you say?
Oh, sometimes I'd go for a few weeks. It would depend on what was happening back in Italy. And I've since, traveled from the U.S. as well once I moved back home. I would go to Egypt sometimes for 4, 5, 6 weeks. I came to have family. I felt they were family, friends who lived there. My best friend lived and worked in Abu Dhabi and Dubai for many years back in the 80s and 90s. And that was when it was still just a dusty camel farm.
When you say 80s and 90s, it seems like I'm thinking that was just yesterday, but no, it's like 40 years ago, wasn't it?
Tell me about it. But a very interesting anecdote was when I went to my good friend's wedding in Abu Dhabi. And she was part of this expat community that was very large, and they were running all of the Western hotels and banking headquarters, et cetera, at a time when that area in the Persian Gulf was just tapping into their petroleum money and expanding and developing and really seemingly overnight creating this city, these emirate states that we now come to know as being very Disney-like in their futuristic architecture and visuality. But back then it was all very different. And I arrived by myself, and it was before cell phones. And they stopped me as a Western single white woman traveling alone. And I actually was not allowed to go through immigration because I was considered somebody's luggage, and I was unattended, and I was by myself. And I didn't have a cell phone. I really was kind of taken aback. What stays with me was that they were so apologetic and they were so embarrassed almost that they recognized even then that these were antiquated laws that needed to be
that
changed.
Are still on the books today, right?
Yeah. But it's not the individual, they're just following the national regulations, and it wasn't for them. And so I needed to call my friend. I eventually found her. She came to collect me at that point. It was the next day. And in the meantime, one of the customs fellow apparently had gone home and explained the situation to his wife, and she made me sweets that he brought with me. He didn't speak any English, except he kept saying, my family, my family. Oh. And so I had a very nice, and he brought me mint tea as well. So that was my welcome to Abu Dhabi.
So you just had great experiences to share.
I think also that, I sound like Pollyanna and very naive, but what you put out, you reap.
I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, I think that there are who said that? Anne Frank, there are kind people everywhere. And they were horrified, really, that it was not their law. They would lose their jobs had they, let me off and go free. And they saw that there was a solution in sight when we finally, tracked down my friend in that world of pre-cell phones. Or pre-email, how antiquated we were. How did we exist? How did we survive?
I wish that we could go back to that. I really do.
Maybe not, but I understand.
Well, I do think it was the good old days. I do have that feeling. And it cost me $4 a minute to make a phone call from Vietnam back in 1992 it was.
Coins.
Oh, I don't remember coins. I remember going into a booth at the post office and having to make a call there. I don't even think they took coins. I think they just checked how many minutes you were on the phone and then charged you for it.
What they wanted.
Yeah, exactly. And it was $4 US a minute, which was just absolutely crazy. You made a comment. You said something about understanding from the heart someone's intentions. And I always say you follow your gut instinct. Do you believe that it's one or the other? It's your gut or your heart? Because I've never heard anyone describe it as kind of following your heart and just kind of making sure you get invited to someone's house for dinner. Are you following your heart? And I don't mean in a love affair kind of thing, but that you feel it in your heart that this person has good intentions and that you're going to have a good experience? Or do you do a gut check?
I think if you're invited to someone's house for dinner, you have to follow your appetite.
I love you, Patricia. You're just awesome.
How hungry are you? I think it's all just semantics. Okay. Are you following your chakras? Aren't there certain chakras that exude a certain energy? I don't know. I think it's just who you are.
Okay.
Your experience from this lifetime and everything that you bring with you into that particular moment in time. And from previous lifetime. I mean, it's whoever you are and how you respond. And is it visceral? Is it, intellectual? Is it common sense? Is it, and where does your common sense reside in your body, in your gut, in your heart, you're in
your mind, in your soul?
Yeah.
What is it? Yeah.
It's just you, it's you, Beth.
Do you think about those metaphysical things? Do you kind of explore them, or are you just talking off the cuff here? And the reason I ask, because you did say something about, because I don't want you to feel like I'm putting you on the spot there. So I'll share a little bit, because you said something about kind of a previous life. And I make a joke that I feel at home in Vietnam more so than almost any place other than Seattle, almost any place in the world. And when I started going to Vietnam, 1992, I'm 5'2". I was taller than everyone else. I was certainly blonder than anyone else. So I stuck out. Yet I landed there and I thought, oh my gosh, I am home. This must be a past life thing. There's got to be something there that just makes me feel so comfortable. So I'm just wondering, do you kind of think about those things? And is there a place where you feel like home?
Well, I always felt, because my Italian heritage was all important to us growing up, and we always identified with it solely. My father was just like an adjunct, because he too had been welcomed into the Italian orbit of the in-laws and the, cousins and the Sunday lunches that went on for 4 hours, because who doesn't love that? But I was not surprised that when I arrived, I felt so comfortable there. But it didn't surprise me, because there were so many things and ways and smells and the dialects and the accents were different, but it essentially was the same language, and it was the same, reaction in the little grandma. It was just everything that in its own shape and form I had known growing up a million miles away in America. But I also speak to people who are, fourth generation Anglo-American or, Mexican or not any kind of Latino root, but are just totally, and they feel the same way. So is it a response from, past, it's a little hokey for some people to really wrap their mind around, but I can imagine that we're in this universe for the first time. And I've had so many charts done and so many palms read, and I've spent enough time in India where, that whole notion is as commonplace as, 3 meals a day. It's just part of how you view life. And so I give it great credence. I believe that we bring with us a certain recollection that's in our every, fiber, but I feel pretty much at home everywhere. Especially if you give it time. Maybe you arrive the first day and you're 24 hours and you're walking around with your mouth open because it's a whoa moment. But even in Japan or in Asian countries that are 180, that are so removed from what is familiar. But, at the end of the day, you see a mother with her child, or you see, a father toiling away so he can put food on the table, or you see a boyfriend and girlfriend kind of stealing, a kiss, or we're
all connected
so much, on myriad different levels. So, but I think that we create our own barriers, or we assume that there will be, impossible language problems or customs, but no.
Well, we have a lot of self-talk. It's travel, it's health, it's job, it's can we buy a home on our own as a female? There are all these barriers that span all of that, and it's all this negative self-talk. We talk ourselves out of things before we even allow our friends to talk us out of things. And that's the point that I do it myself. I still do it. I still catch myself doing it. But that's what I try to instill in other people, is that don't talk yourself out of it before you've even had a chance for it to formulate.
Rather, very much so. But in addition to talking yourself out of that, to not buy into the way you were raised. So you may not be creating a conversation with yourself so much as just listening to everything you ever heard from day one. So you don't need to buy into that.
No, you don't. I totally hear where you're coming from. But I think what happens is, because we start, especially women, I think, because we are told from day one, from a very early age, that we can't do certain things, that there comes a point where we don't even have to hear the message from someone else. We've already talked ourselves out of it. You can't go to the Middle East, Patricia. That's too dangerous. We've talked ourselves out of doing something before we've even allowed it to become a thought or a seed of a thought, which is really sad. I think just challenging assumptions and challenging that self-talk, even if it's not quote unquote negative, but there is that self-talk that's constantly going on.
Yeah, the limitations.
Yeah. I come to New York and I'm intimidated. I grew up in New Jersey. I didn't spend a lot of time in New York, but I spent enough. But sometimes I think part of the reason why I just walk everywhere is that I'm intimidated by the subway, because I don't know how it
I'm intimidated by the
good.
subway.
You did take an Uber here today, didn't you? Okay. Well, there's our secret then. Let me ask you a couple of questions that I often get asked, and I have a hard time answering. So I'm anticipating that you might have a difficult time too. How many days or months or weeks, however you want to posit it, do you travel in a year? Because people probably say, look, you're leaving in a couple of days for Uganda, right? And so people get the impression that you're traveling all the time because that's what you want to put out on social media. That's what I do, right? Because I'm not going to talk about my boring life in Seattle and my cup of tea, although I do sometimes. So how many days would you say, or weeks or months, are you traveling in a year?
It is a tough question because it changes from year to year and from month to month. And I often see it, especially every April when I sit down to do my taxes.
Yeah, that's a good time.
When I think, whoa, I traveled a lot. And it's like, was I gone that long?
And they're all a write-off too, which is great.
And then I also have, enumerate them just so it makes sense in my head, and I line them up January through December. And I put the name of the destination, and sometimes I'll forget even having been there, and it's only like 12 months later. But it's just a glorious blend. So sometimes I see my past year in terms of trips and in terms of destinations, because, for example, I recently went to Iran. And it was 2 or 3 weeks, but to me, it was such a standout experience that it overshadowed and eclipsed everything else I did that year, because it possibly was my most eye-opening and enjoyable and insightful and fantastic experience ever.
When were you there?
2 years ago.
Just recently.
Yeah. So sometimes it's only 2 or 3 weeks, and it'll feel like that was my standout experience ever. And other times, a trip will be 3 or 4 days and will have the same impact. It doesn't need to be many weeks. It can only be just a few days, and it doesn't need to be the other side of the world. It can be, in Colombia, or it can be in
San Diego.
Yeah. Or you were mentioning Santa Fe. It's not so much, I think, the physical number of days that I'm gone. And, from one year to the next, so I'll be gone for 2 weeks and I'll come back for 1, or I'll be gone for 3 weeks and I come back for 2, or sometimes I'm home a month.
Mm-hmm. Crazy, isn't it?
I know. Yeah. And I finally get to open junk mail from 3 years ago that's, creating a listing mountain in my office. So
do you live in a house?
An apartment.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't have houses in Manhattan.
True. Yeah. I'm thinking of a garden. So potted plants or something.
No, not even. No pets, no plants that need to be, watered to.
Air plants.
Yeah. But no silk flowers. I don't do silk flowers. But it's very erratic. And sometimes I just love being home. I'm a real homebody. When I'm home, I just love staying home. And other times when I'm home after 10 days or 2 weeks, I just need to leave. And invariably there's something else. And I often have trips planned, many in advance and often into the next year. And sometimes I'm already planning for 2020. So I'm very aware that time is precious. I just became a senior. I just qualified for Medicare. That was traumatic for me.
No, don't you become a senior when you start getting the AARP?
Oh, no. In my mind, I put it off till 65.
Oh, good. Yeah.
But being a freelancer, I always had really paltry insurance. So if nothing else, I finally get what
you deserve it.
Yeah, thank you. But it is, there's that twitch in my left knee. And every time I turn a landmark birthday, which is every year, I give myself the gift of travel as I give myself the gift of travel. Like, oh, it's Tuesday. Okay, let's go somewhere.
Where am I going? Yeah.
But it was my 50th, and my friend shares the same birthday as I. And so we did something grand, and we went to Machu Picchu, because it's not an easy trip, especially if you want to do the whole Inca Trail and the valley. And there's so much beyond just Machu Picchu, which in and of itself is fantastic. And you need to be careful about the altitude. But I had been to Denver. I thought, I can do this altitude thing, and I couldn't. And I had been to the Himalayas, and, so it's very unpredictable altitude.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
So my friend was absolutely fine. I died.
Oh.
And I wasn't in one of those fancy hotels where they pipe oxygen into the guest rooms. But they did give me my own oxygen tank in the lobby of our hotel.
Oh, you really struggled.
And an oxygen mask. Oh, yeah. I wanted to die. I mean, I had a headache the size of Montana. So I was sitting in the lobby, and a very lovely, I could just tell by her aura. She's a beautiful face, and an older woman who was sauntering over to me. And I thought, oh, please do not sit down here. And I mean, I knew I looked like I was in distress, but I just wanted my oxygen. And to condense a very wonderful anecdote, she was from Newark, African American, celebrating her 90th birthday. Her first passport, her first stamp.
Oh my gosh.
She had dropped out of school at 11. Her story was my father's story. The recession, the depression of 29, dropped out of school at 11, worked every imaginable job her entire life, put all of her kids through school, graduate school. She had a gynecologist, an attorney, like all of these illustrious. And for her 90th, and I'm thinking they had to wait till you were 90. For her 90th, they gave her a trip to anywhere in the world that she wanted to go for her first trip abroad.
Oh my God.
At 90. And she said, they gave me this book. Perhaps you've heard of it.
Drum roll.
She said, it's called 1,000 Places to See Before You Die.
Oh.
And she said, and I could highlight any place in the world I wanted to go. And they would, get together and powwow and choose one and make it happen for me. And I chose Machu Picchu. And she said to me, your knees have expiration dates. She said
hers hadn't expired yet. Ted 90.
No, she was on her second replacement.
Okay.
Bilateral replacements twice. And she said, you have to do the difficult places first. And those words have stuck with me. After I took off my mask and said, boy, do your kids have really good taste in books.
Yeah. Would you like me to sign that?
And her husband, and they were celebrating their 70th wedding anniversary. And her husband was upstairs resting because he wasn't feeling well either. So you do have to at 65 or at 35 or at 11, you have to understand that there are no guarantees. There is no, all of those cliches. There is no dress rehearsal, carpe diem, make it happen, all of those reasons, all that stuff.
But that's what people say.
Yeah.
But I don't have the money, but I have a family, but I have a job. I only have 2 weeks off.
But hey, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And do you need to, organize your closets or clean out the garage or paint the deck? I mean, I've heard it all.
I know.
And my list is pretty long too. It's just that it never gets done because I'm too busy grabbing that time and giving up the Starbucks coffee every day and reassessing my priorities and understanding that whatever in life brings you joy, whatever makes you smile, whatever just thrills you and brings you happiness. I'm my best. I'm my happiest when I travel. And it doesn't need to be someplace extravagant. It doesn't need to be, a Cunard transatlantic crossing.
Yeah, the Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah, it can be something very modest. It can just be whatever it is that stokes you and, really gets you, psyched.
Yeah.
Remember that? Does anybody use that anymore?
Yeah.
Whatever it is that kind of lights you up and just, has you understand that, life is grand and how blessed am I. And if it's, gardening or crocheting or caring for your grandkids, that's all wonderful too. But think beyond that.
Yeah, I agree. And I tell people to bring that when they're traveling. And by bring that, I mean, not just bring it so you can do it on the plane. Go find a community to go do it with. We were just on the Aran Islands in Ireland. Have you been?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, how magical. And we had a knitting session. I'm not a knitter. And I was shocked at the number, I shouldn't be, but I was shocked at the number of women who wanted to participate in this knitting class. And they all just had a fabulous time with our one hostess on the island, Una, who taught them the local knitting. And it was just amazing. So just bring your whatever. If you like to dance, go take dance classes in Buenos Aires, or if you like to knit, go somewhere where that's popular.
And these days with the internet, it is all so findable.
Yeah,
you
sure
can
is.
find the most obscure, bizarre, just crazy things that you never even thought might happen just down the road or across the globe. And, the world has really shrunk in that way, but I say that in a very positive way. Yeah.
Sure. Do you count the number of countries you've been to?
I just for the umpteenth time yesterday had this conversation because there are many clubs where you have to be. And I think for the fourth time, a different one has asked me to come and speak, and I haven't answered them yet. And I'm afraid they won't want me because I have no idea how many countries. I'm kind of thinking it's like north of 100 and less than 1 million.
Yeah.
But I just don't. And what do you consider reason to check off? Is it 28 hours? Is it 48?
I know there's a big controversy in the travel world about the kind of the judgment that goes with that and what's appropriate.
But I do appreciate it. And I do understand it easily because it gives one a sense, me, the, queen of lists with 1,000 places, it is a roadmap for me, and it kind of neatly and conveniently between two covers of my book lines up, region by geographical region, the different places that are both my favorite experiences as well as a number that are my own wish list. So the same idea, links those two, because as you tick off the number of countries around the globe that you've experienced, you understand that, I've got to get going. I've got a lot to see. There's a lot out there. Look how little I've seen. And at the same time, look how much I've seen, and look how lucky I am, and look how manageable it is. People said I'd never be able to make it to Antarctica. It's actually very accessible. Mm-hmm. It's fantastic, and it'll be, the experience of a lifetime, and it's not inexpensive, but it's pretty easy to make Antarctica happen. As with so many other areas in the world where, the more you don't travel, I think the more you don't travel. So for those people who do have a wish list and they've made it to 100, my hat goes off to them, because they don't take the kids to Disney World every Thanksgiving, and they don't have the new car every 2 years. A lot of them are saving and scrimping and making it a priority. They're not on a trust fund. They do work. Sometimes many of them, live for those 2 weeks and plan years in advance, because it's the only way they can make happen something that is very important to them. And I think that the more you get into that mode, the more you understand that all of the world is at your fingertips. You just need to have to want to make it happen.
There was something that you said that triggered something that I heard recently that I want to share. And that was, it was on another podcast, and the person that was being interviewed talked about being 50, having just turned 50. And I think he was basing this on kind of the average lifespan of a male, 78. And he said, I figure that I have 28 summers left. And when you put it like that, and I'm saying this in a very positive way, what I'm about to say, I just want to put it in that light. So he's saying, I have 28 summers left. And when you realize that, it provides a sense of urgency of what am I going to do with those 28 summers? And he said, I see my parents twice a year, and they're 70. Maybe they'll live to be 90. Or what did he say? Maybe if they're 70, and he thought maybe they would live for another 10 years or something. Just again, going back to averages. If I see them twice a year, 20 more times, seeing them 20 more times that's not okay. So how can I change that? What can I do to change that? And I think if we look at life like that, and I'm a Buddhist practitioner, so death gets talked about a lot, and appreciating life and mindfulness and appreciating every day and knowing and accepting that life is limited, because I think a lot of people are in denial about that. But if you look at it that way and you start looking at it in terms of a person who has a job who might be 50 years old, and maybe they have another 15 years at their job before they can retire, and they have 2 weeks vacation. That's only 15 vacations. What the heck are you going to do with those vacations in the next 15 years? And then you start planning. Mm. Then it really gives you that, lights your fire, as you said, in terms of figuring out how to spend that time. That's the important thing.
And when people hear about my book or read it or see me, speak with me, meet me, the first thing out of many people's mouths is, it's overwhelming. How am I ever going to see all these 1,000 places? And it was never, ever meant to be a place-by-place, obligatory, compulsory, you must see but rather to kind of be a buffet, if you will.
I like that.
Or a spread, and to have things, lined up and easily geographically findable. Maybe it's Southeast Asia, maybe it's Africa, maybe it's Northern Europe, but easily usable, because whatever jumps off the page, whatever place calls you, whatever place is special to you, you have to be discerning and you have to be particular. And yes, our days are numbered. That's the only thing you know from the day you're born. There's no guaranteed this guy somehow knows he's going to make it to 78. God bless him. I know that I'm lucky if I make it till this afternoon. And even then, who knows? Some crazy Uber driver could, do away with me. So I think you have to be realistic, and whatever, like I was saying before, whatever it is in life, you were saying knitting, food,
dancing,
whatever, then to really embrace that and to see how much you can find time or create time for it in your life. You have to create the possibility and the priority, because otherwise you get caught up in the flow of life and the years go by and suddenly you wake up and
kids are grown, they're out of the house and you're looking out the window.
But then there is that sense of, it's too late now. And not because that's the reality, but that's what you've convinced yourself.
And that's what other society has convinced you of.
Yeah.
As well.
Like I'm 68, it's too late now. And I'm thinking, what?
Yeah.
68.
Like this 90-year-old woman that you were talking about. I have friends, I have a friend who climbed Kilimanjaro at 85 and she just turned 90 a couple of weeks ago, and she travels. She just got back from Mongolia. She still travels every year and goes hiking in Nepal. I've got another friend who climbed Kilimanjaro at 74 and a couple of others that climbed it at 70. So no, it's not
And
too
the
late.
Camino, the famous
Camino, I know.
There was something on social media about this group of 70-somethings, and it was called 70-somethings on Our Way with a capital W. And they had dreamt about it, and I thought, you go, girlfriends, because understanding that it's 70-something, whether you're 71, 79, it doesn't, as long as you have it in you. Mm-hmm. And if you can find the girlfriends or the granddaughter or, your third husband, or if you need to go alone, it doesn't matter. Just go. Just because there's a very good chance you'll come back changed, either profoundly or superficially, but you'll come back a different person, and it emboldens you and it, and empowers you, and you'll come back already planning your next trip and the one after that and the one after that, because you've understood that all your life you thought you couldn't or you shouldn't, or for whatever reason you didn't. And suddenly you find it in you, you make it happen, you go out, you have the time of your life, you meet people from all over the world. Even if you're going to Chicago, you still meet people from all over the world. Even if your world is America, it doesn't matter. You meet people, you do things that removes you from the same old. And it's really, it's a wonderful thing. And we can, as Americans, we can get that passport overnight. Mm-hmm. You can get that visa. We have one of the strongest passports to anywhere in the world. We can get visas.
You are incredibly inspirational. I like to wrap up these conversations by asking a question. And I know in various forms you've already answered it, but I want to have you reframe it or just kind of boil it down. It's the Be Bold podcast. What does it mean to you to be bold?
That's such an easy question and a very loaded one, because how it resonates in each individual person, young, old, male, female, working, retired, wealthy, impoverished, it resonates in each of us very differently. In travel, I think it is to get off the proverbial sofa. And that sofa can be a myriad different things to many different people. But wherever you are comfortable and whatever you are familiar with and whatever you know best, leave that behind. Close the door behind you. Go out the front door. The world is yours. The possibilities available to us are there. And it's very, very easy for us to get out and explore and to go and to see and to discover and make friends along the way. But you just need to want to do it. So get off the proverbial couch.
I love that.
And I don't think, to be bold, some people think it needs to be like just the strength and the conviction of Hercules. No.
You don't have to jump out of an airplane.
No. Just baby steps, right?
Exactly. Just little steps.
Who is it that said, St. Augustine? No, he said, the world is a book. And he who does not travel reads just one page. So be bold and read pages 2 through, etc. But it was another, maybe Confucius or one of those Asian sages who said that, every trip of 1,000 steps begins with just one. So let tomorrow be that first step. Get off home base and start with your first step. And may it be a baby step. May it be getting a bus ticket and taking a day trip from the town or the city you live, or being very spontaneous and grabbing that $199 round trip ticket to Iceland. Oh my gosh, have you been?
No, not yet.
Oh, Iceland is heaven.
I know. They started doing direct flights from Seattle to Reykjavik.
I saw.
It's on my radar, and seeing the Northern Lights, very high on my list. It will happen.
You need to bring one of your groups.
Well, maybe. There's some things.
I'm planning your life for you.
No, I know. There's some things that I feel like, well, one, I have to go check it out myself before I can bring a group.
Yes, you should. And many times.
And right. But then sometimes I feel like there are just things that I have to do for myself. There are things that I want to show people, and then there are things that I want for me, and then there's things I want for John and I, so that, they're just not shared. They're more sacred than that.
Yeah, I understand.
And that seems like one of those places, at least to see the Northern Lights.
Yeah. It's otherworldly.
I have to go see it. Yeah, myself. Anything that we didn't cover before we wrap up here? Anything you'd like to add? I think you have, I am so inspired just listening to you. You are so positive and, so life affirming and interesting. I am delighted that we had a chance to chat.
Thank you.
And,
Me too.
But if there's anything else that I didn't cover.
No, but it's very interesting what you were saying about how different experiences you want to have to experience them in different ways. And that really rings home to me, because there are some places where I just want to be alone. How I envision them to be a destination and a kind of trip that promises some kind of enlightenment or emotion that I want to process and enjoy alone time with me. And other places either I've been to or I just know that they're the right places that would be best experienced with my husband or a loved one. Mm-hmm. Your best friend, your mom, your mom and your great, 3 generations, I think, is a remarkable thing. So many women in their later years are so fit and still so curious that to see 3 generations of family travel, I love to see that. And others, in a group. A lot of times you need to travel in a group. When I traveled to Mongolia, I went with a group. When I traveled to Iran as an American, you need to be part of a group. And, a lot of people rolled their eyes and said, oh, what a compromise, or I'm just not doing that. And I thought, I enjoy groups, small groups, big groups. It's fun. It's, at the end of the day, it's fun. And I've made friendships that 20, 30 years later can be traced back to those groups where you arrive solo and a little bit, feeling off and alone, and within a day or 3 or after a trip of 10 days, you're, kind of inseparable and already planning, as I mentioned before, planning your next great adventure. So I understand how destinations in your head kind of filter down and settle into different categories and how you hope to one day experience them. But however you do, I think at the end it's just experience. It's just important that you do.
Step out. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Where can people find you?
Midtown Manhattan. When I'm here.
Your books, your
So
social
1,000
media.
Places and 1,000 Places in the USA and Canada are both pretty much findable anywhere. And certainly online, through the online vendors. And I always like to support our independent book sellers.
They're in the bookstores for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And also, we do a wonderful 365 a year calendar. So every day I bring you somewhere.
Know.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're pretty cool. So every day we go someplace different. It's a desktop.
A little tear off.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also social media. I have a very fun Facebook page with over 4 million followers.
Wow.
And I love the exchange. And I've learned phenomenal things by people who I didn't even understand were following me from Bangalore or from Hong Kong. And, they weigh in and I learned things, from the comfort of my keyboard. So
Is that 1,000 places?
To see before you die. Yeah.
I'll link to all of these in the show notes too.
Yes,
So.
great. Thank you.
Anything else?
So
Twitter?
No,
Instagram?
No.
Okay.
Well, they're out there, but I don't give them as much energy as I do my 1,000 Places Facebook page.
Yeah, I'm more active on Facebook myself. So
Yes.
Patricia, thank you so much
Thank
for your
you
time.
very
I am
much.
so delighted that we finally had a chance to sit down, and we'll do it again at a travel and adventure show or somewhere else, or please come to Seattle and come visit, and I'll show you some places.
Wonderful city.
I'll show you some places to die for.
And I'll send you a mental postcard from Uganda.
Oh, yes, please do. Great. Well, have an excellent trip, and thanks again for taking the time out today.
Thank you very much.
Wasn't that fun? My favorite takeaways from that conversation were, one, her formula for exploring. I love the idea of alternating between a trip abroad and a domestic trip to explore your own country. The other takeaway from that is just giving people permission to check their luggage because, you all likely know I'm a huge fan of carry-on only, and mainly because the last thing I want is for my bag or any items in it to go missing before I even land. But I do love that she embraces allowing people to check their bags, kind of giving permission for that. So, as always, a reminder that if you'd like to connect with me, you can friend me on Facebook, and I'm WonderGal on Instagram. I've also been tweeting out episodes a little bit. I haven't tweeted in a long time, but you can find me at Wanderluster on Twitter. You can find out more about me by visiting wanderlustandlipstick.com. You can sign up for my newsletter on the Wanderlust and Lipstick site, and you'll receive a series of tips for making your travels safer. You can find out more about our tours, my tours that I lead at wandertours.com. That includes the Papua New Guinea tours that I mentioned earlier. I've got a trek up Mount Kilimanjaro, Tanzania safari, all kinds of really very cool stuff. Ladies, you can join us on the Be Bold Facebook group. We've got nearly 2,600 members in that group, and it's a community of amazing women who are sharing their wins, sometimes their struggles as well, and getting some great support. In the meantime, a lot of encouragement. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Be Bold podcast. And until next time, be bold.